Hi, friends. I'm Heather Miller, CEO and founder of social impact startup Grasshopper, talent acquisition and DEI specialist, mom of 2 humans and 3 fur babies, most under 4, former professional ballet and hip hop dancer, yoga teacher, interior designer, caregiver, provider, retirement planner, innovator, social connector, and the list goes on. As you can tell from my bio, I've always taken drive to the extreme, and for the most part, done pretty well juggling all of my hats. However, I say this on behalf of most of us, the past 3 years have been very challenging. My personal experience included moving to an unknown city, the unexpected death of my mother, and the birth of my first child 2 weeks later, launching a startup during maternity leave, the pandemic, building diversity strategies for a global corporation in the wake of George Floyd's death, another baby, and then, the icing on the cake, a layoff. I felt like I was approaching a midlife crisis with no space to do so. As a result, I've been thinking about balance and whether that's actually a thing. Join me as I speak with some amazing thought leaders and women in my life to understand how they keep the fire going and the lights on while staying sane. We'll explore drive, juggling priorities, taking no prisoners with your schedule, love and sickness, pursuing your dreams, enjoying the journey, and figuring out what is right for you. We hope these conversations help you err on the side of midlife epiphany versus midlife crisis. Welcome to Balancedness. Gabe, welcome to Balancedness.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm so excited to chat with you. We've chatted a few times over the years, but this is going to give us the opportunity to dig in and learn even more about each other.
Absolutely, I'm ready.
So I think I was thinking about the dates here because when we last chatted, we were trying to figure this out. And I remember I had just had my little one, Halston. So perhaps it was about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And you and I were introduced by my McKinsey colleague and friend, Zach, who is your friend.
Yes, he and I were actually in the same college a cappella group. So that's how we met. And I had reached out to him as I was sort of job hunting at that time. And he was working at McKinsey, and that's how I got connected with you.
Yeah, and I remember number one being so enamored by the a cappella background. I just find it so
Thank you.
fascinating. Fun fact, John Legend, and I think I probably told you this because I carry this everywhere. It's such a silly fun fact. But John Legend was in the a cappella group at Penn when I was in school. And
Wow.
then I had this moment a couple summers ago, actually, when I was in Martha's Vineyard, and it was Obama's birthday. And so he threw his big birthday, and John Legend was there, and I bumped into him in the grocery store, and I was like so starstruck.
That's incredible.
But anyways, I think a cappella is amazing. It takes such talented people to create not only the voice but also the music. So kudos to you.
Thank you. It's actually going to be our like 60th reunion of a group next week. So heading back and probably going to see Zach. So it's a
So
small world.
cool. So
Yeah.
cool. And I really wanted to recruit you for McKinsey at the time. I loved your background, and we'll get into this.
Mhm.
I love that you have such an artistic background and that you found your way into business. I always find creative thinkers are amazing problem solvers, but you were considering consulting, but then you made the choice to stay where you were. So we're gonna get into that, and I've been disappointed ever since. But I'm very happy for you, and sounds like you're absolutely finding your way.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you can, please introduce yourself to the community. And since we're talking about balance, like all of you, everything, every part of what makes up Gabe Wieder.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
And to give you a balanced perspective of who I am, on the business side, what I would probably have said is I am a founder of a mental health startup. I am a product designer from Stanford. I am a designer. I am a writer. I am a creative. And on the personal side, I would say that I am a theater nerd. I am gay. I am Jewish. I live in New York. And yeah, I think I would still say that I am a lifelong learner who is still looking for that balance. But I think that even in my short time in like this business working world, I've definitely learned quite a bit over the past couple of years. So I'm excited to share.
Yeah. So you're a lifelong long learner. Love that. I am as well. And thinking about balance, like what have you learned and how do you think about balance?
Well, I would say for me, it was something that was really tough, especially going into the startup space. There's a lot of expectations when you are in a startup that you are constantly working, especially when it's a mission-driven company like my company, which is, for context, Some Things, which is a mental health platform for teenagers where we connect teenagers with trained 20-something-year-old mentors to help them with their mental health. And having a purpose of helping these teens with their mental health means you're never really off the clock. And that can be really, really difficult to find that balance. And so I remember towards the beginning of that time, it was more along the lines of sort of overworking myself until I would have to sort of disassociate and like watch a TV show and sort of binge watch things and stay up late and just like scroll on TikTok for hours and things like that, just to compartmentalize and sort of take control over my time because the rest of the day was just work. And I started to notice that that was not going to be sustainable. Um, and the way that happened was I was tired and I didn't feel like I was showing up to my meetings in the right way. I didn't feel like I was bringing the right energy to meetings. I didn't feel like I myself was a healthy person. And I remember that one of the things that happened was at that same time, I felt a real lack of creativity, which I think is like a good sort of canary in a coal mine for me, which got me to get this book called The Artist's Way, which is about sort of unlocking your creativity. And while there are a lot of different tools in that book, I didn't stick with all of them, i.e., like the morning pages. I'm not a morning person at all, so like that didn't work for me. But specifically the uh, personal dates, as in like dating yourself, was a huge unlock for me. And also just walking around and taking time without music, without listening to a podcast or things like that, and just walking around outside, and just being with your thoughts was also a task that they had that I think I really changed things for me, and I still do to this day.
I am reading The Artist's Way right now as
It's
a
great.
study. I've read it multiple times, but every time I pick up something different. I am not a morning person either. I have like 20 unmarked journals. I like to pretend like I'm gonna do it and then I don't do it, but I can absolutely stick to the personal and the artist dates. Um, two things that you just said that struck me. And so want to ask you about them. How did you differentiate between the fact that, startup life requires nonstop work and a total dedication to it, and then also the space that you're in, the mental health space, and how do you decide what's zapping your energy, the entrepreneurship or your dedication to the community?
Mhm. That is a really interesting question. I would say specifically for me, there's two sides to this question because one, in essence, for me, though, I felt like it was the same thing. Just because of the nature of the company and because of the nature of my role being so in touch with these teens. And I had my own teens that I was mentoring. I had mentors who were mentoring teens themselves. And so it was such a multi-pronged approach to it that we were doing. And so every day I was just talking with people and talking with people about mental health. And that was my job. And so that was part of the entrepreneurial thing, but also it required a ton of empathy. And I think there was an element really of empathy fatigue that definitely started to set in. And that is something that you hear when you talk to professionals in the mental health space a lot. And that contributes to a lot of burnout and just being there for people, especially when you're not there for yourself, is not a place that you want to be. Because when you're not taking care of yourself, you can't actually be that person that other people need in those moments to be able to take the energy to listen to them. Honestly, like, so one of the trainings that I do with all of our mentors is a specifically active listening training. And I think a lot of people underestimate how active listening needs to be when it's good. And part of it is this energy of being able to be empathetic and really listen and ask good questions and sort of repeat back what people say, because especially teenagers, they will know if you're phoning it in. And so it was incredibly, incredibly difficult to just maintain that level of energy, as well as have all of the side work of like just running a business, all the operational things like creating CRM, sending out blast emails, like organizing people, setting up calendar invites, like all that stuff, which in and of itself is overwhelming. And then to add all of the interpersonal stuff that I was doing every day definitely took a toll. But like I said, having those times in the middle of the day where I could go on a walk, go on an artist date, or just be there with myself towards the second year I was doing this company, I think really, really unlocked things for me.
I'm glad you set that boundary for yourself and took some time to refill. Tell us about your early career trajectory in the entertainment world. I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'll just sort of share with you that whole story into how I got to here. Which so I have a background in product design at Stanford. I was in this product design curriculum. It was amazing. It is sort of the most entrepreneurial major that we had. And it was all about user interviews, empathy, need finding, really understanding people. It was a mix of a lot of things. But in essence, it was an engineering degree. So we were in the engineering school, and so like had to take a lot of physics classes, had to take fluid mechanics. That was rough one for me. But because it was product design, it was a mix of engineering, art, and psychology. And so like that was a really well-rounded thing that, and the reason why I chose that major in general is because I think that that connection of things really made sense to me in order to build the skills that you would need to start a business. And on that note, I also minored in theater. And so I was an engineer and an actor. And I was like, I'm from LA originally. I know that I love the entertainment industry. I've always been enamored by it. What can I do to combine my engineering and my like theater vibe? And for me, that was set design. And so I thought, you know what? It's great. I'm going to go to LA. I'm going to be a production designer. I love television so, so much. It's like a passion of mine. I think we truly live in or at that point, we lived in a golden age of television. Now it's very interesting because I think things are shifting a little bit, but I'm excited for the new shows that are coming out. But uh, I went back to LA and it was the pandemic. And so there's not a lot of production that was happening in LA. And so I was there. I was sort of side, like working on startups and things like that, that I could get. But I was just waiting around for an entertainment job. And then all of a sudden, I get a meeting with like somebody high up at like Lionsgate. And they were like, hey, what do you want to do? I was like, I want to be a production designer. They were like, you should be an assistant in an art department. And I was like, great. How? And they said, well, there's nothing that's happening in LA, but there's one show that's opening up in New York, but it's starting in 2 weeks and you live in LA, so we can't do that. And I said, I can be there. And he said, in 2 weeks? And I said, absolutely yes. So I packed up my life, and in 2 weeks, I moved to New York and I never looked back. And so through that, that first show that I was on was Love Life Season 2 on HBO. And then got to move on to things like Westworld, got to work on uh, the crowded room for Apple TV. It was quite a wonderful time. And the people that I worked with in the entertainment industry were just so, so wonderful. And the interesting part about that is that entertainment jobs are really contract based. And so I was very lucky that the people that I started working with were as amazing as they were and decided to bring me on to their other projects. Um, and it was interesting because the transition into business and into creating the startup actually happened at the end of my contract on the Crowded Room for Apple TV. And I got a message from one of my friends who was in my product design major. And it was our like class group message. And he was like, I am thinking about mental health and this sort of space. I really want to give back to teens specifically. And I'm just really interested um, in what a startup in this space would look like. Does anybody know anyone who I should talk to? And what's really funny is, and I didn't talk about this a lot, and this is part of, I think, who I am in general as a whole, but all through high school, I volunteered for a teen to teen crisis hotline. And part of the reason why I did that was because as a teenager, I had my own mental health issues and I really, really struggled. And thankfully, in my teenage brain, I thought maybe if I could learn how to help myself, I could learn how to help other people. And so I started volunteering for this crisis hotline called Teen Line in LA. And I worked there all 4 years of high school. And then I love that organization so much. And it truly did teach me so much about myself, connected me with so many caring and empathetic people, and truly changed my life. And so I ended up working with them after school and would, when I came home from college, would work with them to create sensitivity training for the Los Angeles Police Department on juvenile psych holds. And so just really loved that organization so much. And then I had my friend being like, hey, does anybody know anything about like peer teen mental health? And I was like, do I? And that's how we decided to get lunch together. And from that very first time, we started talking about what the idea of somethings would be.
So I remember this because I think this is the point where you and I were talking about consulting, and you decided to stay in the world of entrepreneurship. So what was that pivot like? How did it feel to move from entertainment, and you were so dedicated to that, so dedicated that you
Mhm.
picked up your life and moved to New York. So um and then how did the transition from the entertainment world to entrepreneurship feel? In addition, I want to hear about the genesis of Somethings.
Absolutely. It was a very interesting process because it was different. And especially, like I said, during that time, and that's when I was meeting you, I was also like looking for other jobs and sort of seeing what was around. And the truth is, when I first talked with Patrick, the CEO, and my friend from Stanford, he and I were talking, and I was like, this is a really great idea, but I'm in a transition. I want to know what I want to do. And this is great. Why don't I come and work for you for a couple months? And we'll see what this looks like. And at that time, I was actually also like working on a project to hopefully get into the union and be a production designer, and also applying for like consulting jobs and things like that. And what ended up happening was that the energy that I loved so much in the entertainment industry, i.e., the something changed, something changed, and we need to make a whole new set by tomorrow morning. Call everybody that you know, don't spare any expense, and make sure that we have all of the items that we need, and like have everybody on board, and like stay there till like 2 a.m. to change over everything and like do it and do it now. It feels like a very similar energy to the startup world of this thing needs to be done. You don't have a lot of guidance, but you need to do it. And it needs to be done today because you have a really important meeting tomorrow that just got put on the books. And so that energy and that, I'm not a very patient person when it comes to those types of things, especially in business. Red tape and things like that, I think, um, definitely are something that like can frustrate me. I understand that there are certain times when that is necessary, but especially when you are a pioneer and you're trying to do something, it's been so wonderful to see an energy in people when they can actually get things done and execute on a task on their own. And though that was the carryover that really allowed me to transition from the entertainment industry into two people with a Notion board trying to start a company.
I love it. That makes so much sense. And we'll talk about this offline, but you're making all these analogies to set design and production design. And I don't know if we ever talked about that we have this background in common. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but anyway, this
Okay.
is all like really resonating with me. So why some things? You talked about it a little bit about, your high school dedication to it. It
Mhm.
made sense for you. What have you built out at Somethings?
Totally. So the reason why I really decided to stick with some things, even as I was like looking at all of these other options and things like that, was because I think it was the first time where I really got to unlock my own potential, which I know sounds sort of like cliche, but for me, as I was doing this, not only did I get to pull from my own experiences and really put a lot of value on this volunteer experience that I thought was just, something I did because I liked to do it. It was a fulfilling thing, but I never thought would be a job for me. And what was really interesting was that as we started, we ended up interviewing hundreds of teenagers at the very beginning, very product design, very need finding. And they were really hurting. There's a teen mental health crisis going on in our country right now. And a lot of the teenagers weren't using the mental health resources that were available to them, or really struggling to find people that they could connect with. And specifically, the things that they wanted were people who were younger and more relatable to talk to. Because a lot of the people we were talking to in the mental health industry were so much older than they were. And you would hear these teens talk about getting into a room with like a 60-year-old therapist and trying to talk to them about the bullying that they've had over Snapchat. And the therapist just says, hey, don't go on Snapchat, don't go on social media, throw your phone away. And that's not really advice that these teens who have been in the pandemic, who the only way that they really know how to socialize and like really form that friendship is through social media for 2 years. They're not going to give that line up. And so instead, to see the difference of when they get connected with somebody who's younger, who says, hey, you know how to turn off your likes, right? You know how to set like screen time boundaries. You know how to like use this in a healthier way so that you can still have that connection, but in a more positive way. It really unlocked something for me in terms of how people interact. Um, and what was really fun as well for myself was that I also got to unlock an entire network for myself. My mom is a therapist, and what was really interesting and was definitely hard when I was having my own mental health issues as a teenager because she herself works with teens. And so part of the reason why it was so hard for me to reach out was because I didn't want to make her feel that she had failed as a parent. But when I finally did, she was so amazing about it and getting mental health support for myself and also connecting me with Teen Line to do this opportunity. So she had known that, and that's why I had been aware of the mental health world in general as something that I could volunteer in. And not only through her and like all of the family friends that I had known and the people I had worked with at Teen Line, I got to create a clinical board that could oversee the things that me and Patrick were doing. And it was so amazing to me that these people were willing to say, yeah, Gabe, this sounds like a really good idea. We're in it. We're in it with you. And it was just such a wonderful experience to have that vote of confidence. And then to get investment off of that was wild to me. We raised $3.2 million from General Catalyst. And at that point, we had maybe 15 teens in our program. And a group of clinicians who like I had pulled together and a training program that I had worked on based off of the trainings that I had done at Teen Line, and I had put it together and somebody thought that it was worthy enough to give us $3.2 million. And to me, that really was one of the sort of game-changing aspects for me where it was like, wow, these entrepreneurial ventures, these things that you hear about of people just going out and building a company, that's possible. That's not just like a pipe dream. It's something that you can do, and it just takes sort of the courage to be able to do it.
So let's dig into fundraising. We talked about this a little bit on our pre-call. I want to know, how have LGBTQ plus organizations like Gaingels been important in your founding trajectory? And what has it taught you about being an openly queer person in business?
Absolutely. I think it has taught me so much. So Gaingels is actually an investor of ours. Gaingels is the largest LGBTQ syndicate, I believe, in the world. I'm not, we'll fact check that.
Okay.
But it's such a wonderful, wonderful organization. And the people that I've been connected to really have a different feeling to them. I know that, again, this might sound cliche, but like representation really matters. And I think it was really, really hard at the beginning of this process for me to know my own worth and what the value that my time had. And partially it was because my background wasn't necessarily I wasn't a third, fourth time founder. And so, and my background technically was not in a clinical realm of the medical world. I didn't have a doctorate. I was just somebody who really cared. And I didn't think that that was worth anything, which was the biggest change when we started to get this traction. Um, but it was still really hard, especially like in boardrooms and meeting with investors, talking, like we were part of an accelerator as well called One Mind, which is a specifically mental health focused accelerator. And that too had a very different vibe than all of the other places that we were sort of like accepted to, like Y Combinator, things like that. When we would talk to people there, there was such a co sense of competition almost. Not necessarily, like obviously they were working together, but it was guarded. And what's really interesting is I feel like in sort of smaller groups, whether it's specifically about mental health or the LGBTQ community, there is a larger sense of camaraderie. At least I have felt. And that really started to open up things for me and allowed me, I think, to share more of myself, especially because my role as more of like a clinical side of the sort of empathy and training and product design of how these relationships look like in this mental health new area. I had to show that I was able to be an empathetic and caring person. And I think before I was nervous that if I did that, I would reveal things about myself, like my sort of flourishes and like uh very like clearly gay coded language and lilts and just how I express myself. I think I come off as very clearly flamboyant, and so I think I really censored myself. And it wasn't until I saw people who were there who were successful, as well as was a part of a community that felt a lot more open and caring and empathetic, that I felt like I could be myself. And that's when I felt the best in terms of communicating my own ideas.
And now you're transitioning from being a founder to the venture space.
Yeah.
So what's coming up as you're doing this?
I think what's really interesting about it is that it is, it feels a lot about, I guess the way I would put it is I have to market myself now, which I didn't have to necessarily do. And I think that that in and of itself is its own learning, where I got really good at marketing some things. Some things is a product, it is outside of myself, and it is a thing that I can say, this is what it's good at. This is where it needs some work, but we're trying to find that. And this is where it can need help. But that distance really helped me sort of separate it from my self-worth, from like what I was doing, what people thought about me. All those things that I was saying sort of got in the way of my expressing myself. And what's interesting is like I'm now having to take that next step of learning how to market myself into the sort of investor industry, because being an investor is about you, it's about your network, it's about the people that you can connect people to, it's about your thoughts and where you think the world is going. And to be able to stand there and really own that space is, I think, a great evolution for my pathway in my career.
That's incredible. So I'm curious about how you are marketing yourself in this world that's largely led by social media, given everything that you've learned about social media in your work for some things, like
Absolutely.
what kind of path are you taking in
Well,
the
so
branding?
yeah. Exactly. So in terms of that branding, I am still currently working on it, but I think one of the things that I really tapped into, which I think you could tell a little bit in my story originally of how I founded some things, is this networking ability of being able to actually utilize my network and understanding that it's so much more powerful than I even thought it was, is something that I really want to pull through. And I want to be that person who doesn't just sort of use their network in one way, but is a connector of people. And so whenever I now go out to like investor dinners or like founder meetups or things like that, like for example, currently for the One Mind cohort of like the accelerator we were part of, I am one of the spokespeople that they chose to actually maintain founder community across the cohort. So I host like monthly meetings with all of those founders, just to like keep tabs, keep everybody connected, help people out where they can. And that truly for me is the most energizing thing, is being able to connect people in that way. And that's what I found through this sort of startup lens is it was great to be able to do that in the realm of some things, but I want to do it on an even larger scale and to scale that impact. And so that's sort of my marketing, which is, wow, there are so many different communities that I can tap into. It's my Stanford community from being a product designer. It's my entertainment industry community. It's my mental health community from all of those founders. It's being able to take those ideas and make them into a reality.
I love that. Um, I'm currently going through, excuse me, a self-branding exercise as well. And so the idea of connecting the dots and using all of your backgrounds and communities is an incredible thought. So we're
Totally.
going to pivot a little bit. Um, as a sophomore at Stanford, you were diagnosed with a brain AVM. So can
Yes,
you tell us about this experience and the processing of the trauma and how it's changed your perspective on life.
absolutely. It was a wild experience. For a little bit of context, an AVM is an arteriovenous malformation. So it's something that you're born with. It's not something that grows over time, but it is a malformation of veins and arteries that are connected. And veins and arteries have different wall thicknesses. And it's sort of going from a high pressure system to a low pressure system. And if it goes that way too quickly, it can cause it to burst. And that is the fear in an AVM. It's not like a tumor where it's like it's growing and pressing on things. It's that if my blood pressure were to do something weird, or like blood were to go from one area to another area where it shouldn't have gotten connected, it could burst and then I would have bleeding in the brain. And a large percentage of that time I would die. And then the rest of it is just various forms of disability. And so the way that we found this, and this is sort of a wild story, was I was in Alaska with my dad. My dad had moved to Alaska and we were hiking, and I was visiting him for a week, and I was having like these sinus headaches. And what's really interesting is my dad is actually a neurologist. Small world. And he said, Gabe, you don't really get headaches very much. Like, you should probably get that checked out. And I was like, it's just a sinus headache. Like, I'm fine. So just like took some Advil, like would take NyQuil because it was kind of hard to sleep. And I was like, whatever. So then I went back home to LA. And I remember like that night coming home on the flight, like things started to get like not so great. And so then by the next day, I had a huge headache. And the really funny part is that I had an audition for the Groundlings the next day, like to get into their classes. I got in actually with like my brain AVM sort of spiking. Um, and by that night after the audition, I was at dinner with my family and I remember it was so bad I couldn't even eat. And I was like, wow, there is something wrong now. Like, I need to go to the urgent care. And as we were going there, I was like, no, 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 I need to go to the emergency room. So we got to the emergency room. I got there. They were like, you probably just have um, a migraine. You probably are now like you're in your like early 20s, migraines are developing, probably have a migraine. Here's some Advil, and like we're gonna give you a CT scan because we have to. But you probably just have a migraine. And I was like, ugh, okay. So we went into the CT scan and I came out and I will always remember this nurse saying, hey, we're gonna give you some morphine. Like, tell me, like, when you feel like okay. I was like, morphine? Like, that's that's a lot. But I was like, give me all of it because this really hurts. But like that's a lot. And then I remember getting a text on my phone from my dad that said, I'm on my way. And I was like, I literally texted him back. I said, you have the wrong number. And he was like, no, Gabe, I'm getting on a plane. I will be there tomorrow. And that's when I realized that things were pretty serious. And I was told by the doctors that I had this AVM, and they showed me a picture of it, and it's 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters by 4 centimeters, which is one of the biggest that they had seen unruptured. And it's like about the size of like a plum that was taking up the entirety of my occipital lobe. So I actually currently don't have an occipital lobe, which is like everything that has to do with sight. And so I remember the doctor being like, can you see me? And I was like, yes, I can. And the funny thing that I was talking to you about briefly before is what's really funny is like I'm the only person in my family who doesn't need glasses. And so somehow miraculously, as I was growing up and had this AVM just taking up that space, my brain just put that functionality elsewhere and just dealt with it and moved on. And I have had absolutely no symptoms before that time. I am just a regular person. I would have never, ever known that this happened. And so that's why I count myself one of the luckiest people in the world because when they were doing all the testing on me after they found it, there is still debate on whether or not it like ruptured a little bit or not, and maybe that was my headache, or I was just really lucky and had a migraine that just clued them in to the fact that this was there. And so then the scary point on that was that I knew that this was a thing that was in my head from that point on. It was a ticking time bomb, and there was a percentage of chance that it could burst at any time. There's nothing like a time bomb in your head to make you understand that every day is precious and that you could die at any moment. And so that was something that was really weighing on me as I was like going into my junior year at Stanford. And I was like, I want this out. And they were like, because the options were either keep it in there because we don't know, there's not a lot of research on it. So there were some papers that said just keep it and just stick it out and just like deal with it if it ever bursts. Another side was like, you need to take it out as soon as possible with brain surgery. And then the middle path of there are ways that you can like embolize it or radiate it to like cut off the blood flow because it's not brain tissue. You don't need it. It's just extraneous. And so if you cut off the feeding vessels, it would just sort of like shrivel and die. And like you wouldn't be hurt by that, but it's very targeted and you have to do it right. And so all of these things were things in my head. And I personally was like, I want it out. I want to get brain surgery. And so I remember talking with a bunch of doctors that summer, coming up with a plan. We were going to get a brain surgery at Emory University because like there was like the foremost sort of surgeon who would take out AVMs, and he was amazing, Dr. Barrow. And I went into that room. My family was flying in to come see me after the brain surgery. I went in, and I remember Dr. Barrow coming in and saying, Gabe, I can't do this to you. This is a very big AVM, and if I do this, you will have some sort of loss or disability, and I don't feel comfortable doing that to you. Even though like the whole night before, I had been like, I'm going in for brain surgery. I know what I'm willing to give up. Like, even if I come out and I can't see anything, like, I just don't want to live with this pressure of like just this massive anxiety in me all the time because I knew that wasn't sustainable for me. But this was a decision that I'm very, very thankful that Dr. Barrow made, but it was really, really hard for me. And what was even harder was that it was a breath of relief for my family because they didn't have to see me after surgery. They didn't have to worry about what would happen. They were like, thank God he's not going through surgery. But for me, I was like, I wish that I had gone through surgery. And so from that point onward, the next step was to radiate it as much as possible so that eventually I could get brain surgery. And radiation takes 5 years. So I knew that for the next 5 years I was looking at just dealing with the fact that this was in my head.
So over those 5 years, how did you mitigate the stress and the pressure of, trying to live a normal life on on a quote unquote normal life on one end and the other going through this treatment?
Yeah, it was really tough. It was really, really hard. Um, I think for me it was ruthless compartmentalization, um, as well as really leaning on my support systems. I went right back to school. I would go like on the weekends back to Atlanta to get radiation. Um, and then I just continued my junior year. I was a freshman RA. I was chosen to go, so I was an actor as well. And like one of the things just in my sort of like spur of the moment, I could die at any day. I auditioned for this play at school, and one of my teachers was like, "Hey, you're really good. Do you want to go with like a group of four of us that's doing a play in St. Petersburg, Russia? It's two professors and two students. Do you want to be one of the two students to like do that?" So I went there for like 2 weeks just in the middle of my uh year, my in the middle of my junior year, and like was making these decisions that I think I'm really grateful for because they were amazing, wonderful experiences. But I can tell looking back that it was because of this pressure that I wanted to achieve. I wanted to experience things. I felt a huge pressure to like look at the AVM in the face and say, I do not care. I'm going to live my life to the fullest potential while I have it. And it did sort of feel manic to a certain degree. But while I was in it, that I mean, you can only deal with it in the ways that you can deal with it. And I'm glad that I did it in those ways. Obviously, there were positives and negatives of it, but I think overwhelmingly it was probably positive and informed a lot of who I am today. And I think also informs like my desire to like get things done and do things quickly and like go out there and be a startup entrepreneur and like do that kind of stuff. And I think what's interesting now is this past year was the 5 year mark of my radiation. And that is the point at which I got an angiogram, which is like where they like pump like dye into your blood and like whatever. And it turns out that the radiation that was trying to make it smaller before it got taken out with surgery actually did such a good job that it entirely closed off the vessels. So I don't need brain surgery. And it was such a hard feeling to cope with because it was an amazing, incredible day for my family. And it was like, wow, he's done. He's healthy. He's great. But again, it was that dichotomy of I was preparing for brain surgery for 5 years. And so the metaphor that I've come up with now, which I think is pretty accurate, is have you ever like watched any like survival shows like Alone or like anything like where it's like people go out and like survive in the wilderness and like train for that? So it's like that. It's imagine if somebody was training for 5 years to get to do this really, really hard thing. And like, hopefully by the end of it, they would win $1 million. And like their whole family's like helping them train for it. They're like going to go out. They got chosen to be on this show. And then all of a sudden, it's going to be their first day. They're like almost ready to like go out and like do this really hard thing. And then they get told, actually, you won. We'll just give you the $1 million. You can come back to the reunion shows. Like, great, that's awesome. Your whole family's like, amazing. He doesn't have to do this really hard thing. But for you, you've literally been training for 5 years to like be on this show. And so, yes, it's wonderful and amazing. And I'm so grateful. But there is an element that's just, it's odd. It's a strange feeling. I hope that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And before we got on this Zoom, I was thinking about how many films have been released where the premise is, somebody's got 14 or 20 days left to live. Like, what's on their bucket list? What are they going to do? But you have the opposite. It's kind of the story of you've been given like a new lease on life. And that obviously is a huge change in perspective. So how is that playing out now?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm still obviously like coming to terms with it, but I think one of the things that I've really realized is what a privilege it is to have a life that's a lot longer than I thought it would be. Because like with this AVM, the chances that I would live past like, I don't know, 40, 50, not that great. Um, and so knowing that I have maybe like even 50 more years of life to go just means that there's so much more that I can do. Um, and yes, I still have that energy, just that is inherently me. It's part of me to like get things done. But I also know that like now, if I were to start a career path at 40, like I could still have a 50-year career path that like I'm the expert in it and have done it for 50. Like it just it takes a little bit of the pressure off. And I think one of the things that I've really started to learn is that like knowing what you want is so overrated. And that was something that I felt like I needed to have because I felt like I had such a shortened time to do it. And so I was like, what is the thing that I need to do? Like, what is my calling? What am I gonna do? And it's really shown me now that I've sort of had this experience of just being given so many more years of life that it's really showing up every day that is the important part. And then I will find what it is that I want to do. And I think that one of my favorite quotes, it's more of like an image from Walt Whitman, really, really spoke to me during this time as I was like trying to come to terms with this. And he has this image of life being like a boat tacking against the wind. And tacking is when you do that sort of zigzag motion to like get against the wind. And it's the idea that all of our decisions are like those zigzags. They can feel so disparate and so different and bringing you in every which way. But the truth is, as you're going forward and as you're making these zigzags, if you zoom out, no matter how crazy your zigzags are, there will be a point at which that becomes a straight line if you zoom out far enough. And to me, getting more years of my life allowed me to feel like, oh, if I just keep moving forward, that straight line will keep going. No matter if I am in the entertainment industry, no matter if I am doing startups, whatever it is, I'm still moving forward on that line, and that line is where I should be.
What a beautiful image, because I often try in my work to connect the dots for people and what they've done and how their skills are transferable. And also just thinking about that in my own experience and path. And so thank you for that gift.
I'm glad that I can be useful for someone else. Like it's owed
Absolutely.
to me. Yeah.
So we're going to play a quick game that we call yin or yang. It's
Great.
kind of like a would you rather. Hamilton or Les Mis?
Hamilton.
That was easy for you. Wow.
Well, it's actually very hard. I was in Les Mis as a high schooler. I played Jean. No, wasn't Jean Valjean. I was wow. I'm even for Javert. I knew it started with a J. But like that was a heck of a lot. So Hamilton, very much more my thing.
Fair. I know you like installation art as well. So Donald Judd or Yayoi Kusama?
Ooh, I'm such a Kusama fan.
For you.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love both. But
yeah.
okay, and then finally, nonfiction or TV pilots for writing, for a
For
writing
writing.
exercise.
For writing. That one's really hard because I do both. And I would say right now, I'm probably in a nonfiction mode. I'm just in that era of my life.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being here, Gabe, and for sharing. We loved having you on.
Thank you so, so much for having me. I'm so glad that we got connected and I got to do this. It was such a wonderful time. Thank you so much for the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for supporting another episode of Grasshopper's Balancedness podcast. If you liked it, please rate, review, and subscribe on our Apple and Spotify pages. Send me a screenshot at hello@grasshopper.com. That's GRASSHOPPHER to enter yourself into this episode's surprise raffle. And be the first to hear about upcoming episodes and events by signing up for Grasshopper's newsletter, which can be found on our website. Happy balancing until the next time.